to me.
Yeah. We're streaming shortly on YouTube as well. Matter of seconds.
Okay, that's 59, so we're coming up to the hour.
It should be live on YouTube as well now.
Is or isn't?
Let's see. Let's see, it is. Yep.
Okay, great.
Live.
We're nearly just a few seconds in.
Yep, live on both. I'm just going to share to Facebook.
Mahmoud, forgive me, I constantly get mixed up with the name of the committees that you work with. It's not Popular Resistance Committees, is it?
Popular Resistance, Popular Struggle Coordination Committee.
Thank you. And where did you finish your PhD?
Coventry University.
Coventry, all right. Somebody was asking me, yeah. Was that a good experience?
Yeah, of course, it was.
Okay. Friends, good afternoon. My name's Mick Napier, and I'm speaking to you on behalf of Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. This is our weekly broadcast where we take a look at some current affairs, stories that are breaking, and try to go a bit more deeply with people we think have something significant to say to frame the struggle for Palestinian freedom and our struggle to deliver solidarity. Today, I've only got two guests. COVID has wreaked its havoc and some other factors, but I'm delighted we've got two guests. One is Mahmoud Zouare from the Popular Struggle Coordination Committees, who will talk to us about a burning issue. That's the relationship between the settlers and their depredations and the Israeli military standing alongside them. After that, we'll talk to Shir Heaver. Shir's an Israeli economist, and we want to dedicate the program to Mohammed Halabi, a Palestinian humanitarian aid worker who's now in his fifth year in Israeli dungeons because he refuses to sign a false confession of fraud. After that, we'll take a look at a major breaking story in Scotland, which is the disgraceful censorship by the National Trust for Scotland of a child's writing in support of Palestine. So that's the bill today. There'll be a few announcements at the end. But first of all, I'd like to hand Mahmoud Zouare over. Sorry, I'll be discussing with Mahmoud myself. Mahmoud, listen, I've seen you in action. I've seen your videos. Some of them have gone viral. You confront the Israeli military with nothing but your determination and your comrades and your organization. Why can't you rely on the Israeli army to charge settlers for some of the worst crimes that you can imagine? Why not?
Thank you, Mick. Thank you for organizing this and inviting me to talk about this important topic that can be seen from different angles with different perspectives. But let's talk about the first-hand experience of the people who are living under these different components of the Israeli colonial power in Palestine. And recently, this becomes more visible for everyone to understand what is the relationship between the settlers and the army, the Israeli army, and how they complete each other in the process of discriminating, violating the rights of the Palestinians and their properties from land and any belongings to the Palestinians. It's a good question to ask. This is, as they call themselves, between brackets, Israeli Defense Forces. To defend whom against whom? I will start with an example of that happened recently when they cut the water from our village. 80 days without water. And
you mean they cut the water? You mean they cut the water by accident?
No, they deliberately disconnect the water from our village for 80 days. The people get angry. They went to the main road where settlers are passing, and we discover that they closed the valve from the settlement. So the army came, and the duty of the army is how to facilitate the life of the settlers so they can pass through the roads without any problems, without any difficulties, while Palestinians do not have water to drink. This is categorized under they beat you, the settlers beat you, and the army arrests you. So instead of defending you, they are arresting you after you being attacked by settlers. This is repeatedly and frequently happened in many communities in Palestine. Last week in South Hebron Hills, they attacked the shepherds, they attacked the farmers, and then the army arrived. Just the settler points his hand towards Palestinians. So there is no way to distinguish between settlers and the army. Both are doing the same job for the same vision. What the settlers are doing is the first step that they create these de factos, whether attacking Palestinians or attack the belongings of the Palestinians or building outposts. Then the soldiers have to protect the settlers who did that. So there is this visible relationship between the army and the settlers. You can see it very clearly. And now, with this relationship, you do not trust that there will be justice coming from the police, the army, the court system, everything, because they are together in order to discriminate you, to abuse you for an end goal. Just to.
But is this your extremist view as a dangerous radical, or is this a generally held view by all Palestinians in the West Bank?
Yes, this is, I would say, with all Palestinians. What is the good Palestinian for the Israeli settlers? The good Palestinian is the one who can serve them without dignity, just to serve them as a slave. And when they end their service, they stop any relationship with them. That is the good Palestinian that they want, without any political demands or rights or freedom. Now, this is the visible relationship. What gives the settlers this power in order to do so, to annex land, to attack people, and so on? First, there is another hidden system that you have to know about the business of the settlers in Palestine, which is the civil administration. The civil administration is a branch of the Israeli army that rule the occupied territories, that is in fully coordination with the settlers about the land deeds, ownership, all these issues related to the land. So they guide the settlers to the land that be considered as ignorant land or state land, so that if even Palestinians go to struggle legally against the annexation, they will not be able to do it. So they know how to do it. And another issue, which is the discrimination based on the law. The settlers, they implement Israeli civil law on them, while on the Palestinians, they are implementing military laws. And that
now everybody needs to know that people who may be living 1 kilometer, half a kilometer from each other, Jews have one system of law and Palestinians have a different one. Yeah.
Yeah. And not, you know, like, even if we are doing, let's say, the same thing. If I did something illegal according to the Israeli law, I will be jailed for months or years, while settlers can be released for the justification of their post address or whatever. So that is the difference. And it happened with me when I was arrested with Israeli activists who was released, and I remained in jail. We were participating in the same demonstration. Thus, we have to understand there is another component, which is the private security companies. That is an important component of violating the rights of the Palestinians, and there is a strong relationship between them and the Israeli settlers. And now we are still talking about normal, ordinary Israeli settlers. We are not talking about fundamentalists that we will talk about them later. So these.
Can I just check? Mahmoud, can I just check? You're describing a situation from your point of view, and every Palestinian, as lawlessness. There is no law that you can rely upon. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly, that is the point. And what is Israel is doing, from maybe 10,000 cases, there will be one Palestinian case that win, which is to show that, yeah, there is a law, you can apply for the law, and you can go to the police, and you can do all of this. But this is fake. This is fake. There is no law that can judge settlers for their crimes against Palestinians. Let me give you an example. Al-Sharif is a Palestinian who was killed by an Israeli army who took the orders from the settlers. How many years they jailed him? For 18 months. Imagine this. If the Palestinian who did that, how many years it will happen? Another example, with the settlers who burned a Palestinian boy, a Palestinian family in a village in east of Nablus in 2014 and 15, and Abu Khdair, the other guy from Sheikh Jarrah, that they burned back in 2014. What they did to them. Imagine if this is a Palestinian who did this to a Jewish boy. That is the difference, which emphasize that the Palestinians have no law or no trust in the Israeli laws that they will deal equally with the people. How they will do it, and their common vision, settlers and government, is to push Palestinians from their land, is to annex the land, is to ethnic cleansing Palestinians from their land. That's exactly all the Palestinians have the belief, the strong belief that there is no real Israeli law that can guarantee the rights of the Palestinians, which explains why we do not trust the Israeli army, why we do not trust the Israeli court system that discriminate people based on.
Mahmoud, do I remember clearly there was a very unusual case of some Israeli murderers, settlers, who were tortured by the Israeli state apparatus, and their lawyers, and they complained that this should not be done to Jews. It's habitual for Palestinians, that they were being treated like Palestinians. That was the essence of their appeal, wasn't it? Their complaint.
That was the case when they burned the Palestinian boy, and they refused to, for example, demolish their homes. They refused to put them in the same situation as Palestinians, despite the fact they look that they were in jail, and they brought them into the court as if they are Palestinians. But still, they will not receive the same sentences as Palestinians. They will, if this is a Palestinian, maybe he will stay in jail forever. That's the difference. That is the discrimination. Mick, you have to understand, it's not an accident discrimination. It's not just something in court, in everything. Let me give you an example. If there is a car accident between an Israeli car and a Palestinian car, immediately they will come to the Israeli car, the ambulance. The Israeli ambulance will come to the Israeli car. They will check if the Israeli, and those are doctors. Those people should be neutral. They are to survive people, to give aid to people. They will go to the Israeli injured first. If they are good, then they will go to the Palestinian. And that is a way of discriminating people based on because they are Palestinians. And this discrimination is not only against Palestinians who are living in West Bank or East Jerusalem, but also Palestinians who have the Israeli citizenship and they are considered as Israelis. And what happened in the last wave and uprising in Jerusalem, in how many Palestinians who carries the Israeli citizenship are in jail, how many they arrested. Thousands of Palestinians are targeted by the Israeli police because they participated in the uprising, while I would say almost no one or very few Israeli settlers who were arrested for the same thing in these mixed cities, in Haifa, in Jaffa, in Lod, in many cities. So this clearly shows that there is a systematic discrimination against Palestinians. And we have to look beyond the practices of these, let's say, threatening of Palestinians on the ground. They want you to leave. They want you to live without rights as a third-class person with no rights. That is exactly. There is no one can tell me, there is democracy and this is Israel. No, no one can feel the pain that I have living under this colonial power that is controlling my country. No one can tell me, yes, we can bring peace between you and your neighbor. What heavy blood neighbors we have. What heavy blood neighbors who are taking our land, who are controlling our land everywhere. How come we can accept this? That's why it is important to call how to bring those people to the international courts, because we failed to put them here, because the system is protecting them, and this will not last forever. Who can tell me just driving for 40 kilometers I need 2 to 3 hours in order to do that? Who can convince me that this is not apartheid, this is not a segregation, when each single village has a yellow gate and we are not allowed to drive freely and safely? No one who can guarantee for the farmers just over there who are unable just to pick their grapes in this season, because the settlers are there, just arrived from the US or from Russia yesterday. It's not
Mahmoud, we're running out of time. I'm sure you could talk for much longer about the horrible crimes, the full spectrum oppression of the settlers and the military. What can viewers do? You're fighting on the ground where you are. What can viewers do in solidarity with the Palestinian people?
Mick, please challenge the Zionist narrative. When you are talking about the trustees, that they do not want to mention Nakba, how come if I do not mention Holocaust and erase it from history, will the Israelis will be happy? No. So how come they are calling to not to call it Nakba? And the Palestinians were in a journey in 1948, and they came while there are no one in there. 700,000 Palestinians evicted, forcibly evicted from their homes, and they do not want. We have to stand up. We have to stop them. We have to stop them from lying and lying until when they want to continue. This is our duty. We do not want to be neutral. We have to talk. We have to stand up. Erasing Nakba is exactly as denying Holocaust. How come they it's just yesterday? So how come they have this courage? Who gave them this courage? How come they believe that they are masters and the others are slaves? This is stupidity. This stupidity must stop, and we have to stop this now, because we are still living the Nakba.
Mahmoud, it's always a pleasure to have you here. I hope we can have you back from time to time going forward to address viewers. You're on the ground. It's the horse's mouth, if you'll forgive me for using that image. Mahmoud, from the Popular Struggle Coordination Committees, it's a real pleasure. Thank you for joining us today, Mahmoud.
Thank you. Thank you.
Friends, that was a great start. Join Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. We challenge the narrative, and we also try to build effective solidarity. Our next guest is Israeli economist Shar Heaver. Let's see him. He's going to let you see him soon, and so will Amina Abdel Khalik. Mohammed Halabi is in the 5th year of detention. He's been charged with fraud. It's a monstrous calumny. He's entirely innocent, and he has been held in Israeli dungeons until he signs a false confession. But it raises a whole question of humanitarian aid to Palestine. Shar, are you there?
Yes.
Okay. And Amina, do we have you as well?
Yep, I'm here as well. So
okay, I'll disappear. See you in 20 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mick. Thanks for that. Well, we're delighted to be joined next by Shar Heaver, who is an economic researcher whose interests include the economics of the occupation of Palestinian territory, the Israeli arms industry, and others. Shar, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to discuss the case of Mohammed al-Halabi and humanitarian aid that comes into the Palestinian territories. But if I could just ask you a quick question around the recent Polish law that has been implemented regarding, basically it's a bill that is implemented that would limit Jewish residents in Germany, or citizens in Germany, from reclaiming, or not citizens, but essentially limit the ability of
Jewish refugees from Poland, not
exactly
necessarily Germany,
to recover the property that was seized by Nazi occupiers. Could you make some comments around this, especially in light of the systematic ethnic cleansing of Palestinian homes and property over the last 70 years?
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak about this, because this is something that speaks to my own family, my own history, which came from Poland and were refugees after the war and indeed lost property. But I wanted to bring this up because there is so much discussion in the media, even in the progressive media, in friendly media. I've seen this in The Guardian, in the Middle East Eye, but also in the first 60 Minutes show of the SPSC with Salman Abu Sita, who spoke brilliantly about the Nakba and said very important things, but he also referred to the Polish law, and I think what he said there was a mistake. It's important for me to try to correct that, because I think there is we often make the mistake of equating the Jews with the state of Israel. We should not do that. And the fact that Jews have lost property in Poland, not exactly by the Nazi occupiers, but mostly that this is property that was seized by their Polish neighbors. And the Polish government is trying to set up a whole series of racist laws against Jews. And the response of many governments around the world is to say, well, the state of Israel wouldn't like that very much, or the state of Israel should respond to that. But no, there are Jews who live in the UK and they are British citizens, and they deserve to be represented by the British government. And I'm speaking from Germany. The German government is doing nothing to help Jewish people in Germany whose families lost property. So I won't go at length at this because Mick was very generous to say that we could speak about this actually next week, and I'm looking forward to going a little bit more in depth into that. But I think it is very important for us to say that there is no difference between Palestinians who have lost their property in the Nakba and have absolutely the right to receive all of it back with interest, in the same way that Jews who lost their property in the Second World War have that right. Most of these Jews don't live in Israel at all and have nothing to do with the Nakba.
Thank you for that. It just seems that Israel just seems to have one law for itself and a different law for everyone else. But no, we'll look forward to your contributions to expand on that next week, sure. The Guardian recently covered an update to a story regarding jailed Mohammed al-Halabi, the Gazan aid worker who's been accused of funneling millions of pounds to Hamas in 2016. It's a very bizarre story, of course, very preposterous as well. Where does international aid money go, and who benefits from international aid in Palestine?
You know, this is such a complex issue. I tried to create a chart of how international aid is divided into different areas and how much of it ends up in the hands of those who deserve it, you know, the Palestinian people who actually need it and depend on it so much. And the chart became so complex that I've stopped using it in my presentations because people said, this is impossible to follow, because some of it is stolen by the Israeli authorities, some of it is stopped at the customs area, some of it is destroyed by the Israeli military or by colonists, and eventually a very small amount it actually reaches its destination. Mick mentioned at the beginning that Mohammed al-Halabi is completely innocent, but how do we know he's innocent? We know because he was offered a deal that if he signs a confession, then he would only serve the time served, which is 5 years, and will be released immediately. This is a very well-known system of the Israeli legal system against Palestinians, where Palestinians are arrested on propped-up charges without any evidence, and just the trial is dragged on forever and ever, and until the trial reaches a verdict, they are in prison. And they end up serving so much time in prison that at some point, when the trial is close to an end and the prosecution will have to admit that they have nothing, then they go to this person and say, would you sign a confession? And then you can actually go free. But if you refuse to sign a confession, we will pursue the process to its end, which means you're going to be in jail and not see your family and not be able to work or be free for another year or two. Now, in 99% of the cases, people sign the confession. They know how the system works. They want to go free. And this is completely understandable. Mohammed al-Halabi decided he refuses to sign the confession. This creates a very big challenge for the Israeli government. And I think this is something that really speaks to the contradictions of the Israeli policy, because aid money, you've asked me who benefits it, who gets it. In fact, the international aid that goes to the Palestinian territory, most of it, or the biggest benefactor of it, is the State of Israel. Because the State of Israel has a responsibility under international humanitarian law to maintain the standard of living of the population under its control in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. That means basic things, schools, roads, hospitals, that's all something that needs to come out of the pockets of Israeli taxpayers. But the Israeli government said, we don't care, we're not going to do anything. And there is an international community who is willing to foot the bill. So that becomes a present, a gift to the Israeli government, in fact. And organizations like World Vision, who are where Mohammed al-Halabi works, and who are accused of this funneling of money, are organizations that actually serve Israeli interests, not intentionally. I'm not accusing them of being collaborators or spies for Israel, but they're trying to do their best in a system which is rigged to funnel the money to the Israeli economy. They often find themselves unable to buy products for the Palestinians from Palestinian companies or from neighboring countries like Egypt or Jordan because of the custom systems. Instead, they buy these products from Israeli companies. Medicine, shelters, tents, that sort of thing that they buy from Israeli companies. And that's another source of income for the occupiers to benefit from the plight of the occupied. And World Vision is now spending millions of dollars to fund the court case of Mohammed al-Halabi, which is right. They shouldn't abandon him, of course. They are responsible to him. But where does this money go? The money that they pay for the court goes to the Israeli court system. It pays for the Israeli lawyers, for the Israeli judges, for the stenographers, for the whole legal system, which is designed. And this is the same military court system that ends up demolishing thousands of Palestinians' homes and arresting thousands of Palestinian minors. This year, we've seen already 1,000 Palestinian minors, children, who were already arrested by the Israeli forces. And the age of legal accountability for Palestinians is different from the one for Israelis. That's something that also Mahmoud Zwari just mentioned in his talk a few minutes ago. There is a separate legal system. This separate legal system is financed by the organizations like World Vision, which should be allowed to use their money to buy food and medicine for people who need it.
Yeah. So that presents a bit of a dilemma, essentially, for the average person at home in good faith who wants to donate to one of these charities. What do you recommend to them? Should they donate knowing that a small amount will get to the intended recipient, or should they abstain knowing that it may well fund the occupation?
I think I'm probably not the right person to ask this question, because it shouldn't be my role to tell Palestinians what sacrifices they need to make as part of their struggle for freedom. And in 2001, there was a conference of donors, and Palestinian aid organizations actually stood up in that conference. This was the height of the second Intifada. Thousands of Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces. The Palestinian aid organizations called for an aid strike. They said, if donors would stop giving money, the occupation will no longer be sustainable. And maybe they were right, but this is a very dark way of fighting the occupation. It means that thousands of people will die of starvation, of lack of medicine, until the occupation becomes unsustainable and until the system collapses and democracy will emerge. And of course, we're hoping democracy will emerge. We have no guarantee. International organizations are not allowed to do that. International aid organizations are obligated by their own charters to keep sending aid no matter what. So that's why the proposal from 2001 was never accepted. But I do think that there is a way for us around the world to choose which organizations we want to donate to. We can choose the organizations that are openly political. The best example are the Ships to Gaza, the Freedom Flotilla movement, because it's basically an aid project, sending goods into the Gaza Strip. And these goods are the goods that the people in Gaza say they need, that they're not allowed through the normal checkpoints. So they're on various banned lists. For example, the famous Israeli attack on the Mavi Marmara, the ship from Turkey, was carrying wheelchairs that were denied by the Israeli government to be moved into Gaza. So if Palestinians say what we need is wheelchairs, we're going to send them wheelchairs, and we're going to send them directly without going through Israeli customs. And that was not successful in 2010, of course, because the Israeli Navy stopped the shipment. But think about the amount of pressure it puts on the international aid organizations, on organizations like World Vision, but also like the Red Cross and the UN. You have UNRWA, you have all of these humanitarian organizations that keep saying we're not political, and they end up working within the structure that is set up by the Israeli government. But if there are political organizations that say we can do aid better, and we're going to do aid better, and we're not going to pay 1 red cent as taxes to the Israeli occupation forces while we're delivering aid, that puts pressure on the mainstream international organizations and forces them to become a little bit more political. And in some cases, it did work. There were moments in which, for example, during the second Intifada, but there were other moments in which the aid organizations started to say, we cannot do our work under these conditions. The Israeli government is stopping us at the checkpoint, arresting our staff, not giving us visas, so we're just going to pack our things and leave. And whenever they made that threat, the Israeli government immediately surrendered and said, no, we're going to get your visas, you're going to go through the checkpoint. They've set up a special unit within the Israeli military to liaison with the aid organizations to make sure that the checkpoints open for their trucks, because they're worried that if that money will stop, then To quote former Israeli Minister of Defense, Amir Peretz, he said, if we don't allow the UN to send another 140 trucks into Gaza carrying food, the next 140 trucks that will go to Gaza will be out of our pocket, our Israeli pocket, he said. So they know that. And so that forces the Israeli government to make concessions.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely right. Not only did they stop the Mavi Marmara, but the Israeli state actually assassinated several international humanitarian aid workers on that very flotilla.
10 Turkish citizens, yeah.
Turkish citizens, yeah. So am I right in thinking then that the aid is used by Israel as revenue as opposed to actual profit?
Well, that, yeah, I would say revenue rather than profit, absolutely. But there is, of course, a complex issue there because the aid is being paid with international currency, but it is used to buy local products or is used in the local economy, most of it from Israeli companies. So they keep converting euros, dollars, pounds into shekels. And when they do that, the Israeli central bank keeps the balance. So that means that the occupation becomes, if we to use the economic term, a form of export for the Israeli economy. That's very good for the health of the Israeli economy as a whole, because their currency becomes much more powerful. And indeed, the shekel is one of the most powerful coins, currencies in the world. It's not so big, but if you see the trend of the shekel compared to other currencies like the euros or the euro or the dollar, it's going up, partially because the aid money keeps a high demand for shekels, and that increases its value. And that's something that the Israeli government can benefit from because the Israeli central bank can print shekels. And that's a form of export. As soon as that would change, what would happen if, for example, the Israeli government would have to take responsibility, use shekels to buy to buy aid products from Europe or from the United States? That will reverse the direction. That means that Israeli currency will have to be converted into euros, into dollars. The value of the shekel will go down. That's something that the Israeli government wants to avoid at all costs.
Okay, we've got time for one final question, Shar. The UN have called for the Israeli state to grant Mohammed al-Halabi a fair trial or grant him immediate release. How do you preempt the actions of the Israeli state going forward with this case?
Well, it's very important, the fact that this case is public, and it needs to be made more and more public, because it is an embarrassment for the Israeli government, for the Israeli legal system. Now that it is exposing their system of forcing people to sign false confessions when they don't have any evidence against them, that is something that will make it difficult for the Israeli government to keep using that system in the future. I'm sure they are going to try. But if we're going to make a big scandal out of it, then it's not going to be very successful. Michael Link is the UN rapporteur, special rapporteur for Palestine. He's the one who made this call saying Mohammed al-Halabi deserves a free trial, a fair trial. Michael Link was denied the right to come to Palestine. He's the special rapporteur to Palestine, but he's based in Canada because he cannot enter Palestine. This is a situation that is unacceptable. And as long as this is the case, where the Israeli government says, we are so guilty, we can't even allow the UN observers to come and see with their own eyes what's going on because we're shamed, then they've admitted guilt. And through cases of Mohammed al-Halabi and other similar cases, we are able to prove that point. So yes, that does make it more difficult for them to do it in the future. And I think it's something that we need to tell our friends. If you have a friend who plans to go on a trip to Israel as a tourist, just, let them know this is a country, an apartheid country, where the legal system is based on arbitrary military interests, where people do not get a fair trial based on their ethnicity, based on their nationality, and are you sure that you feel comfortable and safe to go to that country? And I think a lot of people will say, well, in that case, maybe we should have our vacation somewhere else.
Absolutely, and you're right. Mohammed al-Halabi's case is certainly not unique, across Palestine. Shar Hever, thank you very much for your time today. We look forward to bringing you back again to discuss the Polish property law. But for today, we'll leave it at that. So thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amina. Thank you very much, and thank you, Cher. Friends, our final segment is a little bit different from normal because there's an absolute outrage taking place with the National Trust for Scotland. We're getting a little bit used, maybe even numbed, to the depredations of the Labour Party leadership, the witch hunts, the expulsions of Ken Loach and Jewish and black members for racism under the new regime in the Labour Party. And we also see attacks on academics and in other walks of life as well. Trade unions have been hauled before courts. It went very badly for the Zionists, I'll reveal in a moment or two, when they took a trade union to court. But the incident up in the National Trust for Scotland is pretty special. And I think the reason why it's special is not the censorship. As I say, we're inured to that. It's that an exhibition in their visitor centre in Bannockburn encouraged young people to write about their experience in protests in general. And some kids wrote about Extinction Rebellion. You know, they object to the planet frying in some parts and flooding in others. And they think action should be taken. Some wrote about Black Lives Matter, the idea that Black lives do matter and Black people should not be killed for driving a car or for looking straight in the eye of a policeman in the USA, and murdered in Fife as well by cops and in Britain. But one of them wrote about Palestine, and actually what she wrote is absolutely word perfect. What's remarkable is that the Zionists in Scotland, almost certainly, well, we know they're linked to the Israeli embassy, moved to silence this voice and to have this little exhibit removed from the overall exhibition. Extinction Rebellion and Black Lives Matter have remained, but Palestine was removed. What did she write? What did Emily, we know her name, write? She said that Palestinians had been kicked out of their homes and land in 1948. She said that Palestinians left inside Israel suffered from institutional discrimination. Now, both of these statements are not claims. Both of these descriptions of what happened in the past and is happening today are incontrovertible. You might as well claim the world is flat. I know some people do that, but they're kind of mad. It's undeniable what she wrote, and that nonetheless has been removed, has been censored by the National Trust for Scotland. And you know, not only is the act of censorship disgraceful, but the rationale is pretty special. But it really means that if you can censor pro-Palestine voices on this basis, you can censor anything. Anything is now fair game to be decided as unacceptable in a public space run by the National Trust for Scotland. And it's thus an attack on all of us. It was a young person who wrote this. It was young people who wrote the exhibits, who described their, the importance of Black Lives Matter and Extinction Rebellion and the movement for Palestinian freedom. And they were told that what they had written, the pro-Palestine writer was told that that was out of order, that she was wrong. She had done something bad. She had upset people and she was to blame, and that the offending text must be removed from public view. It's not even a subliminal message. It's a clear message that a child in school trying to take a stand for justice, not slavery, that's chattel slavery's past, not freedom for India or freedom for Kenya or against the barbaric crimes of other empires, but for Palestine. And she's been told that not that we disagree with you, but that should never have been posted. That's illegitimate. You did something wrong. You didn't make a mistake even, you did something bad. And that cannot stand. It cannot be allowed to stand. It's a species of child abuse. We need to create an atmosphere where people in education kids in education can freely examine issues, can state their opinion without any fear. I mean, when I was at school, we used to get beaten with pieces of leather, but that was usually for being a wee bit naughty. But we were never encouraged to question revealed, the official opinion of the school. But it's important for kids to be able to state their opinions and for those opinions to be recognised and cherished. If I disagree with them, I'll tell the individual why I disagree. But I won't say that's outrageous that you even dare to state an opinion. But that's what's happened with the National Trust for Scotland towards this child writing about Palestine. And I consider that to be a species of child abuse. It's an abuse of the child. Children's opinions need to be cherished. It's an aspect of any healthy pedagogy. And the NTS, the National Trust for Scotland, has violated something very basic. But you know something? It gets even worse. It gets worse. A dear friend of mine who survived Auschwitz, member of the Dutch resistance, Hayo Meyer, passed away a few years ago. He once said anti-Semitism used to be hatred of Jews, but now he said anti-Semitism, he was Jewish, Hayo, anti-Semitism is saying things that some Jews don't like. Some Jews, stress on some. And that's the situation up in the Bannockburn National Trust for Scotland Visitor Centre. The material was removed because some people were upset. One anonymous MP, we have 130 members of the Scottish Parliament, 129 of them remained silent on this issue. One took a position of calling for the material to be removed. We don't know what his or her name is yet. And some unnamed individuals claimed that they were upset. For some reason that I cannot fathom, the defense for taking this material down was that these were, the people who complained were expressing genuine concerns, quote unquote. Now, how can you know these are genuine concerns? There is a lot of evidence that there's an orchestrated political campaign to close down pro-Palestine opinion. The University and College Union is a UK trade union. Some of their Zionist members, one of their Zionist members, Ronnie Fraser, took them to a court, an employment tribunal, claiming that the union was institutionally racist. And he put forward 10 grounds on which that was the case. The judges delivered a blistering verdict against Mr. Fraser. Said there was no evidence whatsoever that the University College Union was institutionally anti-Semitic. And they said this legal action against the union was an impermissible attempt to obtain by legal means the closing down of political opinions with which the litigants, I think they're called, disagreed. So the judges ruled openly that this was an attempt to shut down free speech on the issue of Palestine. And they didn't do so with half measures. They did so in language that I can only admire for its honesty and integrity. And it wasn't a junior bench, it was a bench of very senior judges. So one reason is that it offends certain people who don't like Israel to be called what Israel is, an apartheid state, a murderous occupier, an ethnic cleanser, etc., etc. But the people who removed it went one step further, and I think this is novel. I think this is groundbreaking, because what they said was the material was removed because some Jews and others were offended by this description of Israel, of what she said about Israel, or what Israel had done. But it was also removed to protect the child from the backlash, to protect the child from the pressure of operating in a polarized situation. Now, I have to say, you might think that Israel-Palestine is a polarizing topic, but around the world, and certainly in Britain, that is no longer the case. There is a massive majority of British people, John O'Groats till Land's End, who are deeply suspicious of what Israel does, disapprove of what Israel is doing, and from a very low level of support, that support plummeted during the last attacks the throwing of Palestinian families onto the streets in Jerusalem, the fascist gangs who were attacking Palestinians across Israel. I think the BBC or some newspapers called this community conflict, and so on. But during that crisis, Israel lost public opinion, what was left of it, to a major degree. There's no polarization. There's a huge majority that is very suspicious of Israel. And that's been the case for a very long time. So they're not protecting kids from a polarizing situation. They're protecting a child from stating something which is extremely popular point of view and widely accepted, of course, by any professional historian. So, the idea of protecting the child by silencing the pro-Palestine voice, I mean, you've got most of you must have seen the film Catch-22, but this is Catch times 2. I mean, one, you can't put forward Palestinian views because it will upset Jews. The claim, it's preposterous, but that's the claim. Now you can't put forward pro-Palestine views because you might be involved in a controversy, and to protect you from the controversy, we're going to remove what you've written. I don't know if she's still listening, but I've always chuckled at the old Yiddish joke about chutzpah, having a brass neck, shamelessness. The story of the man who murdered his parents. And then when he went to court and he was tried, he threw himself on the mercy of the court and asked for mercy because he was an orphan. Here we have the Zionist lobby, the pro-Israel lobby, whipping up hostility towards people who put forward pro-Palestine views and then protecting the victims because of the intensity of the attacks. It cannot stand. It's shameless, and it's an attack on all of us. And this touching concern for the children, we want to protect you from pressure. It doesn't seem to extend to Hassan Abu Anil, who was shot through the head by an Israeli sniper recently. One of several children, 12-year-old, but Hassan was one of several children shot through the head by Israeli snipers. And never forget that Britain supplies sniper rifle parts to the Israeli military. But this touching concern for the child put forward by the pro-Israel lobby, we want to protect you from controversy, doesn't extend to Hassan and other Palestinian children whom Israeli snipers manage to kill with a headshot, or sometimes just break the knees from a distance. How can they say that these concerns are genuine? Not just the University College Union showed that they were far from genuine, but were politically orchestrated, and you've got a legal decision to back it up. But we know that one element of the pro-Israel lobby in Scotland, the Scottish Council of Jewish Communities, SCOJEC, which is the British Board of Deputies profile north of the border, they invented anti-Semitism, but not only as they normally invent anti-Semitism, it's just a habit. And what's wrong with anti-Semitism, they must think, because it encourages Jews to go to Israel. And as Zionists, that's an outcome that they seek. But leaving that aside, SCOJEC invented anti-Semitism by Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. They claimed that we demonized Jews and promoted anti-Semitism. And they did this in a Scottish government publication behind the backs of the First Minister at the time, Alex Salmond, who had written a preface endorsing people to read this otherwise quite anodyne and useful history of Jews in Scotland. They were caught lying. They were caught inventing anti-Semitism. They were caught making it up. And there are so many examples one could give of this. The people who moved to get Emily's work removed from Bannockburn, from the Bannockburn Visitors Centre, they work as a coalition. We have a photograph, which I'll post up afterwards, of a political training day in the Glasgow area, attended, probably organised, but attended by the Israeli embassy, an Israeli diplomat, SCOJEC, the Board of Deputies up here, and Glasgow Friends of Israel. And Glasgow Friends of Israel are so disgusting, they are so vile, they are so degenerate that there was another terrorist attack in New Zealand a couple of days ago by an Islamic State guy. But a lot of people were reminded, had a trauma, had post-traumatic stress, and looked back to the white supremacist massacre in the New Zealand mosque a couple of years ago. While that massacre was still fresh, in fact, the same day it happened, or the next day, Glasgow Friends of Israel had a discussion on their Facebook in public. We have the screenshots saying that this was what Muslims deserved, quote unquote. This is payback for what Muslims have done around the world, i.e., actually welcoming the massacre in New Zealand. These wretches, these creatures, work together with the rest of the pro-Israel spectrum in Scotland to promote the sort of lies that have now caught Emily up in Bannockburn and have now not forced actually, they could easily have resisted, and have persuaded the National Trust for Scotland to remove something which says Palestinians were kicked out of their homes in 1948. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. No, that wasn't part of it, but it could have been. And that Palestinians inside Israel suffer from institutional discrimination. So, friends, please go to the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign website. Please don't just send a letter there. There's a letter ready to send. Send it if you want. Amend it as you feel, as you see fit. Just tweak it a little bit or a lot. Personalize it. Say you've just been listening to Mahmoud Souare and Cher Heaver and Amina Abdul Khalik and so on. And say why you think it's important that Palestinians deserve freedom and they are oppressed, and anybody who denies it's either an ignorant person or a scoundrel. The jury's still out on the National Trust for Scotland, but we'll see. And that's it. But don't just send a letter. Please get your family to send a letter. Get your friends. Make an effort, right? Campaign. Campaign as an individual. If you don't join Scottish PSC, then campaign as an individual. But better still, join Scottish PSC. And we will campaign together to not get 100, but get another 1,000 letters to the National Trust for Scotland. Friend, next week, we've got an invitation to Cher to come and join us, but it's a crowded picture. What are we doing next week? Joseph Sheckler was going to join us this week, but we put him back a week. He's going to be in Glasgow for COP26, where the Jewish National Fund, a racist organisation, will be presenting itself as an ecological body. But they build forests to cover up Israeli crime scenes. And we'll be inviting someone to talk about the crimes of the Israeli army, an expert who's written widely on the subject. And sure, come back, because if you want to talk about the significance of the Polish decision, then I'd like to talk about the French court, which found that the Pizarro painting still belongs to the family from whom it was pillaged by the Vichy regime, and so on and so on. So the Palestinian property rights have not been annihilated. And if you're an honest man, Cher, but if you stole a car and sold it to me, it wouldn't matter if I bought it in good faith. It would remain the owner's car. Cher Heaver, Mahmoud Souare, Amina Abdel Khalik, Jimmy Powdrell in the background, making sure that things go more or less smoothly. A big thank you to all of you. Oh, it's an anniversary today. It's an anniversary because 2 years ago, while Israel was doing what Israel was doing, Prime Minister Johnson, Boris Johnson, met Netanyahu in Downing Street. The two leaders confirmed their commitment to a strong UK-Israel relationship, including through trade, cooperation on intelligence, and security. Johnson called himself a passionate Zionist, quote unquote. And on the Balfour Declaration centenary, Johnson wrote, while Israel was killing 34 Palestinians in Gaza, that during the weeks in 1984, he worked in a kibbutz in Israel for 2 weeks. And he saw, quote, the miracle of Israel, self-reliance, a remarkable country, unquote. So the axis of evil goes from London to Tel Aviv, and the axis of solidarity has to go from Britain and all over the world into Palestine and to isolate the roots of Zionism everywhere. Again, comrades, it's a real pleasure to have you. We're getting to the top of the hour. Mahmoud, Cher, Amina, I salute you.
Thank you.
Thank